Yeah. All right, well, I know there's more coming, but the end time doesn't change, so I can't penalize people for being on time, right? So the male masculine journey, a couple of disclaimers. One, this has been a big topic for me for a long time. I did my doctoral dissertation on the spiritual development of juvenile offenders, so that's kind of a narrow niche, but it is my world, and particularly how people develop emotionally and spiritually and in healthy ways. And so I did a lot of research on all different, stages of men's life. Levinson says 7, Patrick Morley gives 7, Richard Rohr gives 2 halves, which is kind of nice. But one of the things I found interesting is that actually in the Hebrew scriptures there's 5 different names for man, and they do follow a progression that people go through and where they get stuck in that kind of process. And so that's what I want to look at. The other disclaimer is I have a child who's non-binary, so now I don't know what works. What's male, what's female, what's masculine? Is that mostly cultural? Is it genetic? So all this is, subject to change, right? Teenagers, early 20s, everything is around sex, and if testosterone levels peak out, it's anger and sex kind of fuel everything. And not that sex is bad by any stretch, but we can do a lot of damage in those years. How many are still paying for some of those? I know for me, I want always to take advantage of everything there is, and so my life of sexual conquest and all that. I didn't really notice how it would come back on me until I got married when I was 27. And so I married this very amazing girl who was a virgin. She was 29. Like, how does that ever happen? From Denmark, this beautiful girl. And she was very affectionate, and so were her parents. And her parents would say, how come Scott never holds your hand? And it was like I had so kind of written into my DNA that sex was dirty. And so it was always attached to shame for me. I felt like I couldn't control myself even when I wanted to. As I got a little bit older in my 20s, I knew if I got with a girl, I liked her, I got affectionate, boom, I was going to have sex with her. And so that was one of the negative ramifications of living in the Zakar stage and having that sort of fuel me. And so, Scripture uses this a lot. Think about Samson. And the problem is when it continues, to be the main thing that thrusts a man's life. Viagra and Cialis can keep you thinking below the belt well into your 60s and 70s. And so that's this first stage. And so what movies come to mind about, a man at that stage in his life?
Conan the Barbarian.
Conan the Barbarian. I was thinking of Animal House, or, almost anything with Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson. These are these guys, right? Forever, beyond their teenage years. It's the definition of a male still in many ways. Sells a lot of products and all of that. But people hopefully move through these stages, and what moves us through is that there's a liminal space between, which is usually where people get stuck in this previous one. And here it shows up as a vision for something bigger than just my conquests. I remember in college and all that, if I didn't have a date on a Friday night, that was like a crisis, And then there becomes a vision for something bigger. Maybe you have a child. For me, it was, I started to work with youth who were, I was a stockbroker in my 20s and got out of it just before the Dow crossed 1,000, so that was lucky, right? But something bigger was like, my only idea of a dream at that point was just to make a lot of money and all of that. And that was sort of now what was moving me to the next stage. Most of us didn't learn what it was to be a man. I don't know how many of you were told what it was to be a man. No, I wasn't either. But you figured it out. And when my father would talk about who made a lot of money, I knew that was a man. So that's what I wanted to do. And that was sort of the vision that moved me out of this party stage and into what the next Hebrew word is gibor. It's the warrior. And you see that show up like 84 times, but mostly in Moses' early years, and Joshua and David. It's going out and fighting battles. And this is a great stage. It's when businesses are started and churches are planted and new things are created. Remember those days in your 20s when it's all about what can I make? Where can I make my mark? And we know from now some of the brain research that this fluid intelligence is really peaking in the 20s, and that's when you're most gifted. You can remember stuff fast, you can process things, you have a lot of energy. But it's also, how many was that when you got married or started having kids in that same stage in your 20s or early 30s? And so sometimes those things collide and they don't really match up, right? Like you're on your adventures and conquering places, and there's other people that are left behind. Kids, wife, and so we do damage out of this stage too. Remember the song, Cat Stevens, The Cat's in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon, Little Boy Blue and the Man in the Moon. When you coming home, Dad? I don't know when, but we'll get together then. And so some of us, we moved into this warrior stage. It's a healthy stage. We conquered battles and went to battle. And some of the fallouts were right in our own family. Like your wife figured that, your first love was your church or your business or, your whatever it was that you were conquering. And she wasn't up for that. Sometimes kids discover that, like the reverse of the cat's in the cradle, they don't have time for us either. And so that warrior stage, it's a fun one. It's energizing. It feels like, this is what I'm made for. What movies remind you of men at this stage in their life?
This would be more like Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
Rambo.
Gladiators, and almost all the sports ones too, right? Remember the Titans, Braveheart. Those things are awesome. Overcoming. We come together. We go to battle. We win. Especially when we do it together. Say that women have more in their brain the bonding hormone. Oxytocin. Thank you. Yes. And men, it's more the battle. The teamwork. Let's go and take this on. And so, what moves people out of that? These are all healthy stages. Sometimes we get stuck in them, but these two we don't have the maturity sometimes to handle these two stages, and so there can be a lot of fallout that goes with us later. But eventually you get wounded. Go to battle enough, you get wounded. And so this is where the big upset comes. What am I going to do with that? And a person who develops in a healthy way, there's this Hebrew name called Enosh, which stands for the wounded man. It's somebody who's stops long enough to feel it and to know it. And you see it showing up in Moses, 40 years as a warrior, and then goes to battle and kills an Egyptian, and then it's 40 years wandering. That's the Enosh stage. Robert Bly said the path to adulthood takes a major detour through Woundedsville. we all move into that space. What are we going to do with it? Carl Jung says it's the most critical component to the development of deeper masculinity. Richard Rohr, pain will either transform you or you'll transmit it. There's no other option. It's the most spiritual. So this is the crux, and there's not much in our culture that helps us move through this as wounded men, because men aren't supposed to be sad. They don't cry. They get up, they suck it up, they go again. And so many of us got involved in Illuman, at this stage. And so what do we do with it? Movies about men in that stage? Not as many. You don't even have one.
Not glamorous.
Dead Poet Society.
Dead Poet Society.
Paris, Texas.
Which one?
Paris, Texas. All right, too obscure. Sorry.
Paris?
Yeah. Paris, Texas.
Paris, Texas. Okay, I haven't heard of
The
it.
Weatherman.
The Weatherman. City Slickers?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Fisher King.
Fisher King. I guess with Robin Williams is the
Yeah.
the Enoch King, right? Yeah. It's like this is the midlife crisis, although I had mine first one at 24. I've had many since, but it's like everything that worked to get you to here is not working anymore. And so the game plan is changing. They changed it up on us when we hit this wounded stage. And our culture tends to, exit people here too, because they're not as useful. Others are coming up behind. And so what moves us out of here is something that is not, it's very foreign to a lot of us, and that is surrender, or beginning to see strength in my weakness. How many were taught that when you first hit this stage? No. Some of you were. Or you came to a place like this and you began to see that, it's hugging the cactus, but there's value in it. And this is what I think is unique for men and women in their process, is that for women, they've largely been initiated through blood all the way along, menstruation, childbearing. Men, if you're bleeding, you're dying. This is not good news, right? What's good can come out of bleeding. And yet the Enosh stage is able to hold that. A lot of the Psalms, Psalm 103:14, as for Enosh, as for man, his days are like grass. What is Enosh? Man, that you would be mindful of him. Even in Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 12, I boast of my weakness, for when I am weak, then I am strong. What's after that? The Hebrew word yish. It's really the mature and integrated man. You know who you are, you know who you're not. This is where fluid intelligence that peaks out up here moves away, and there's crystallized intelligence. That's where your brain gets really hard. Hardened. No, it's better than that. They say at like 52 is the peak of crystallized intelligence, where you can merge knowledge and wisdom. And so it doesn't come earlier than that. It's not an early young man's stage. The yish, mature man, it shows up 75 times. A lot in Elijah's later years, a lot in David. In David's later years, when he has opportunity to take out Saul and says, I'm not going to. That's not my place. And so, a lot of men like this in this kind of stage? Yeah. That's probably why you're here, right? Because if you're here, somebody walked before you. And this stage of the journey, the mature man is a pretty rare, but when you see people like that, you take notice. and you want to be around them. And I think for most of us, that's where we want to move toward. What movies depict people like that?
Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars.
Okay, yeah. Or Martin Luther King movie, or, thinking of like the one Forgiven with Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela. These people stand out, but there's not a great number of them, especially in our culture and day. So this is only the fourth. What moves people from here? This acceptance of who I am and who I'm not. And then there's the Zaken, which is the mature elder. And some of the scriptures, Proverbs 20:29, the glory of young men is in their strength, while gray hair or no hair is the splendor of the Zaken, of the old man. King David in his later years, I've been young and now I am Zaken, old, and from this place I can tell you I've never seen the righteous forsaken or his seed begging bread. We tend to put people at older ages in retirement homes, where my father is. I walk around in that place, but there are some Zakens in there. They're usually pulling people together. They're still doing powerful things and great things, but elders don't get there with age. They're formed, and they're formed through a real trial. I don't know how many of you have gone to the elder rite of passage that Ned is going to talk about it later, but Chris and I went through it, and some of you in here, and I found that to be a very powerful experience of how we form elders, which is so missing in our day and time, and I don't even know what movies would be about people at that stage. Gandhi? I don't know. Right? You're the movie guy. They'll let you think on that one.
Yeah, Merlin's a character. Wow.
Yeah. A lot of these fictitious ones, right? I know. And yet, I remember when my son was doing mission work in Tunisia, North Africa, going to visit, and in the coffee shops over there, where they didn't allow women, it's very traditional Muslim culture, but you'd find people gathered around these old men in there. And at first I was, it stuck out to me, but I didn't know, they're trying to help them or what, but it was like people gathered around them in a very, gaining wisdom from them. And where do you see that happen in our culture? What?
I thought you were asking. Chess club.
Chess clubs.
Yeah, chess clubs are great. The elders, the older men tend to hold the wisdom, and they pass down the chess knowledge. And then there's always that one young kid that just comes in and tells.
Yeah, comes in and
But,
wipes everybody out.
That's
Yeah.
an example where I know it's a kid. It's from chess club.
Yeah, there you go. That takes some long-term wisdom, thinking several steps ahead. So the fruit of that is that it's not about me. And so you probably can see, I'll pass these around, or maybe you can pass them out from David. Some back here. Yeah. This is a chart came up with that brings a lot of things together, but this is an upward and then a cresting and then a downward, like many of you've seen with Richard Rohr's material. But there's a lot of key pieces in here, and where people get stuck in the transitions between these life-giving stages. So what Richard would say is people exit early on as young fools. Everybody's a fool in this diagram, so don't take it personally. Even on the other end, there's a holy fool. But this is my world, working with youth who are in prison. It's how I first got involved in Illuman, was how do we bring a a young man's rite of passage into prisons, because gangs have very clear initiations. Everybody knows who they are. I'm a Blood, I'm a Crip, I'm a, Latin King. They know who they are because it was a very clear initiation. How do you know, how do we know who we are? How do you know when you're a man? In prison, I spent a lot of time in prison. When we begin to speak about what is a man, everybody peaks up immediately. Because nobody knows. That has to be bestowed on you in some way. And so people who don't get enough power in the beginning tend to exit this whole process as young fools, where power is just about guns or holding over somebody. And to even work this process, you have to be given some power to lay it down. So a lot of the work with our grandchildren, our children, our young people is how do we give them power? And this is where initiation comes in. We were, Chris and I were part of designing an elders weekend last weekend for the Crucible Project. And one of the guys who was there was from Kenya, and he's 52, he was at elders. He's supposed to be 60 to come there, but life expectancy in Kenya is probably 66 or 68 or something. So he's definitely an elder. And he told about his own male initiation, which was circumcised at 15. And yeah, and now they do it at 13. So it's not as bad. When he did it, and he told us about that whole process of being taken from the women in the tribe by an uncle into the community of the men, and being basically initiated into what Richard talked about. I've seen the sign out here when he studied tribal cultures for 14 years or so, and found that they all initiated around 5 basic things. Life is hard, you're not that important, you're not in control, your life's not about you, and you're going to die. And how many are familiar with these things? You've seen this come up before. The thing is that these are also how elders are initiated, around these very same things. And while on the early initiation, it's coming to grips with you're not all that. On the other side, it's the completed part of a seed going into the ground and dying, and then producing the resurrection side of all that, which is what your number of hairs in your head are numbered. You're not that important. You're not in control, but you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. Life's not primarily about you, but you're more valuable than all these sparrows that I know so well. Life is hard, but you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. So these pieces, young men and being initiated, I think it's one of the things we're going to have to figure out. And Richard found in his work with tribal communities that cultures that didn't initiate their young men became very dangerous. And so our brother in Kenya was saying, we're learning a lot from the West. So we're not, initiations, we don't do them the same way. And we used to mourn for 3 months when somebody died, but there's a whole segment of Kenya that doesn't do that anymore. They just have a funeral and a wake and some potato salad. And he called it done deal. And he said, they have a lot more crime over there on that part. And so how do we go back to reclaim some of this? And for our children and our grandchildren. So this stage moves up, and then, is this crisis of limitation. And this is a big one when life is not working as it was. What do I do? The old fool just continues on with the same plan, right? Rockefeller, how much is enough money?
A little more.
Just a little more. That's an old fool, isn't it? Like, really? Yet everything in our culture tells us, go back, suck it up, go again. And so we see a lot of old fools just get a new sports car. a motorcycle, a new girlfriend. And it sells a lot of products to keep somebody living in those Zakar and Gabor stages, but it's pretty destructive, and it's not very enticing. Some of us, have lived as an old fool. Maybe that's why we're here. It's like, this is really not working. And others of us really don't want to follow that trajectory. Like, really? I remember, that definition I received from my father of what a man is, making a lot of money. And I had the grace, God graced me. When I was 24, I made way more money than I make now. And the crisis was, if this is all there is, I'm not sure it's enough for me. I just could see the old fool on the horizon. And yet, Henry Nouwen said, everything in our culture goes up and to the right. And so, what's God inviting us to? A whole nother process. And I think you have to be around communities like this to ever even begin to interrupt that. And the first time, it just seems like an assault. You're talking about just being lazy and sitting around contemplating all the time. What's that going to do? Others of us, as others pass us by and we're not able to do the same thing, and our fluid intelligence is waning, and the world is stepping us aside, become bitter and angry. And we know a lot of people like that, and some of us have lived in that space too. This journey down requires, a whole nother thing from us. And one thing's for sure, you don't walk there alone. It's done in community, because what's the point of being an elder if it's just by yourself? It's like, you're just getting old. Elders is about, who is this going to serve, or who's this going to bless into this place of the holy fool? And I think some of the difference is success is on this side, which is a great thing, but fruitfulness is on this side, which is another thing. Henry Nouwen said, there's a great difference between successfulness and fruitfulness. Success comes from strength, control, and respectability. A successful person has the energy to create something, keep control over its development, and make it available in large quantities. Success brings many rewards and often fame. Fruits, however, come from weakness and vulnerability. And fruits are unique. A child is the fruit conceived in vulnerability. Community is the fruit born through shared brokenness. And intimacy is the fruit that grows through touching one another's wounds. Let's remind one another that what brings us true joy is not success, but fruit. And Peter Scazzaro, he wrote Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, observed that for men, their most fruitful decade is their 60s, followed by their 70s, followed by their 50s. So that's encouraging. I'm 65, so this could be my most fruitful. As I'm getting ready to step down from an organization I founded 37 years ago, I'm still wondering who am I going to be, and what will I be, and who will care, and what will I do, and I won't have business cards to hand out anymore. But there's something that pulls me toward this place too. And I come into groups like this, and it starts to ignite that fire, and I start to see some true Sakar elders. It's like, okay, that's the path. This is the path. Walk in it. Any thoughts, just as you see that, before we move into, where people get stuck and how to move through them? Yes.
Two questions. Do you think it normally or always follows a linear trajectory? And the second question is, what if you don't see yourself clearly defined in any one category?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, like a lot of these things, we move into different spaces and we're in different ones, but there often is one that we're sort of residing in mostly. And don't see myself in any of them in particular. Say more about that, like.
I don't know. So like I'm 36.
Yeah.
So I've probably experienced some crisis of limitation.
Yeah.
I think working through that is part of the reason I'm here.
Yeah.
And so I'm, flirting with, self-identity and acceptance, but I'm still, probably not done entirely with the hero's journey.
No.
And so it's like I want to be wise enough to, look for the fruits as opposed to success.
Yeah.
But I still feel like God is calling me to take action when it's appropriate. And so trying to find that balance.
Yeah. That's well said. Yeah, as I said, I think I had my first midlife crisis, right around in here, which those can really serve us, right? Because it's like, don't put everything into this basket. I mean, so though you're making money and you're creating a business or launching an organization, do you need it more than it needs you? That's a good question. And I think for a lot of me, I needed it more than it needed me. And that's not healthy, no matter what your stage you're in. And so getting some of that perspective that what I'm doing more flows out of me rather than coming in to define me, which is the natural course of this. And, this crisis of limitation is kind of where you're at, in terms of this process. So you're starting to hit some things a little earlier, which is grace, right? And the kids and all of that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just kind of touched on it a little bit. This idea, of course, of stages suggests you leave one stage, you go to another.
Yeah.
You're talking about there being stages you return to.
Yeah.
And so my assumption is that as you get further along, there's some kind of integration of these earlier parts
Right.
that bears fruit
Yeah.
in the end.
Yeah.
So it isn't that you cast off
Exactly.
everything from the previous stages, but there's something valuable from each stage that you continue to carry.
Yeah.
Can you say anything more about what's carried forward?
Yeah, that's really, and Richard talks about, it's not like this is bad, this is important, it's really good. It's where, and parts of that we bring with us, skills that we learned here, relationships that we made, mistakes and failures that we did along the way, also maybe define us more than anything else. So that this is all about integrating, not casting off and taking on a whole new thing. But wounds become transformed, or, Henry now talks about the wounded healer versus the unhealed wounder. The process of going through these things and experiencing these things, and that becomes an integrated part of us. Yeah, that's really good. And any others thoughts about that? Other wisdom beyond mine? Yeah.
Oh, I was actually just gonna ask another question,
go.
so I didn't know if we wanted to transition. How do we facilitate or guide young men as they're going through these early stages in life when we're kind of in the other stages?
Yeah.
And we're starting to realize these truths and they're perhaps not ready to hear them.
Yeah.
How do we prepare them, I guess you can say?
Yeah, that's good. I think one of the big things, at least with young people I work with, is how do I invest power into them? How do I call it out of them? Because this is the mark of people who are angry because they never got it, and nobody gave it to them. It's not your job to get something that can only be transmitted from another person. And then, one of the things we do, I learned it from the Crucible Project, whenever we check in with young men, and we work with guys coming out of prison and reentry sites, we always do our sachet check-in with them. I'm checking in sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender, and helping them to locate where they are and what they feel. Now, I learned that when I was in my early 50s, after I almost lost my marriage, my wife said, we had 2 little kids. We lived in a home with guys coming out of jail, and she started to shut down. I said, you know, we're not fighting as much, but what's going on? She said, well, I just have to survive. I can't trust you. Well, you can't trust me. I've never been unfaithful to you. What are you talking about? You don't trust me? What did I ever do? I need this, and all I get is this. Anybody heard something like that? I didn't know what the heck she was talking about. I always thought she was just trying to get me angry, poking me, and then I'd get angry and I'd spew, and then she'd cry, and I'd be like, so I learned to just stuff everything down. Most of us learned that from our anger. I remember killing a sow when I was 12 years old on a farm out of my anger. My father said, you're just like your grandfather, which was the one thing I didn't want to be, was that angry, dangerous man. So that was a survival thing I used. And young people, a lot of them, you know, were very afraid of our anger. And so to just be able to check in, so if we shut down our anger and our pain, we shut down our passion too. So that's one of the things we do with these young guys. They don't know what a feeling is, which is many of us when we started this, we didn't either. I feel good. I feel fine. Fine. Feelings I'm not expressing. So I was feeling a lot, but I didn't know it. But my passion was also waning, you know? And so I think that's a big part of it, is helping them to connect more of themselves, their body to their mind and their heart. We don't have to wait to hear to learn it. Most of us, you know, we got what we got, but we can give young people different things. Yeah. So where people get stuck at the move, from a stage standpoint, you know, there is some usefulness in seeing, you know, this is where I am, and it's where I'm supposed to be, you know. Because where you are is where you're supposed to be. It's where you are. It's honest. Some of us may be stuck, and we can see another possibility, but the completion of previous stages generally involves releasing, mourning, forgiving, reconciling, and even a gratitude for it. Because each of these has a different skill set than the next one requires. One requires going to battle, another requires surrender. Those are 2 very different things, right? And mourning, for example, 137 times in the scriptures, but how many have ever been taught how to mourn? We had a day of mourning last weekend, or a morning of mourning, I guess it was, not a full day. But our brother from Kenya said, yeah, he told us how they mourn. And they hire mourners to come in and cry. And that's a big part of it. And it's about 3 months. But we're becoming more Western. We've already shrunk that down to 2. Like that's a good thing, you know. And to be sad about something. Most of us feel like if we turn that spigot on, it's never going to stop, you know. But it does. Forgiving means to send from, to release, to reconcile. Things that we don't reconcile keep going. We know from brain research that as we keep rehearsing these offenses, our brain records them as new situations. So you're carrying a lot of stuff onto that person, and they're running a lot of your life. They're filling up a lot of your space, you know, giving them free rent. And to reconcile just changes everything. It's like complete freedom and a gratitude. So all these are these stages that we go to. This is where we exit: young fool, old fool, bitter fool. And to move through requires also a mentor, someone who's further down the road, who's walked this out. My spiritual director, so many times, the thing he says to me that's most helpful is, no, you're right where you're supposed to be. No, you're doing good. You're right where you're supposed to be. Oh, really? I feel like I'm spiraling, man. I don't know. Now this is where you're supposed to be. Somebody who, this too will pass. How many, honestly feel like you have someone in your life at this time that is kind of calling you forward like that? Some of us. They're out there, but when I started, I could see about 5 or 6 years ago, I could see the train wreck ahead, and I was barreling toward it, which was going to be what happens when I can no longer do what I do. I won't have this title anymore. It's how I've completely defined myself. The addiction is, creating something new, and I won't be able to do it anymore. And I got really afraid because everybody I saw was miserable, and I don't play golf, so it's like, what's going to happen? And that's when I signed up for the Elder Rite of Passage. That's when I started to do a lot of work. That's when I found people who would walk this in a way that I would want to. Even when I'm here at a table and I find someone who's retired, I ask them, how did you do that? How was that for you? Was that hard? How did you? And I'm hearing all different kind of stories, but like I'm tuned into that. And I've got probably now 6 or 7 guys that are mentors to me through. I'm not stepping down for another 15 months. But I'm really scared and excited about it. Some of you have walked that. Those of us who didn't raise our hand, we need people like you. When someone asks you around the table, think about it, because it didn't come that's not a natural phase for a man who's identified himself his whole life as whatever title. And then a vision big enough to motivate me forward. I think all of these things, it's not about me, but what do I want to be for these others who come after me, from my children, my grandchildren, etc. So, what I'd like to do is just, if you can do it with another person, just a dyad quick, just the 3 quick questions, and then we'll come back. But where I see myself, and you may not exactly in there, but I think as you're talking, it's like, yeah, you're here, but you're ahead of the game in some respects also. Where I've been stuck in it, and what I sense is needed to move forward. Does that make sense? So just, pair up with somebody that needs to be 3, that'll work too. But spin around or...
So, there's lots of things. No, things. It makes yeah, but don't linger with the ink on the white list. You can see it during the front. So anyway, I mean, in each one of these, I can sort of see myself as part of it. I'm wondering, even way back there, it's like, I didn't get a lot of experience of how much goodness high school people are academic. So I'm wondering if something so is that a young midlife crisis, like during this never had any spiritual guys. So I was kind of bouncing around, thinking my way forward. So like I said, I retired 2 years ago. I know I've had aspects of things been able to work away from that, so I feel like I'm not on that back anymore, and I'm not trying to just keep on, hey, I say, I shared this one last year, I shared it on my council, I was like, hey, making more money, getting more support, have a better reputation. That's all. That's all. So, I think I'm somewhere in this area. So, yeah, I held on till 65. So, I'm glad I was Don't we all? Yeah.
It's a 55. The reality is but this is
Where's that one? That was the last one.
they're all
10 years. My wife and I both wanted to get active and work at as long as we could be. But anyway,
so I,
Couple more minutes.
this is all what you're going to be doing with stuff.
and I don't know. I don't have experience.
So I can sort of imagine that. Very dedicated.
That's Accepting that.
Or, I was just a young man, and he said,
We aren't last, you know,
you go bear, you know,
If you got any, you got to invest in sidewalks. So fast. So, last time.
So, kind of wrap up a little bit. Anything that came out of that, or questions, or discoveries, dissensions? Yeah, oh, gotcha. Any thoughts? I was reminded of, this journey of success. Richard said, success after age 30 has no spiritual value for a man. That's a disruptive statement.
Say that again?
Yeah.
Success after age 30 has no spiritual value for a man. Wow. That's Richard Rohr. He said,
Explain it.
so, it can be helpful for your kids' inheritance and for retirement and all, but spiritual value. But at that point, we should have crested enough up this thing, to where we're in a different game plan now, I remember early on I read this book Bob Buford wrote, Halftime. It was changing your game plan from success to significance. And that's basically what I did when I was 26. I moved from success to significance. Only problem was, now I needed juvenile delinquents to get better in order for me to be significant. That's way more dangerous than the first stage. And it's still a game about me and how I define significance and success. And I get a lot of people come to us who are retired and want to work with troubled kids, and that's my nose is really sensitive to that. Why? So that I can be significant, stay away from these guys. Now you're going after the poor, the homeless, the imprisoned, to make you significant. That's a bad second half. I think now a lot more like a hockey game. 3 periods: success, significance, surrender. And you may do the same things. You may still be very successful, but it's coming out of you rather than defining you. It's a completely different game. Even at age 30, what, 36, where you are, that's a whole different game when it flows out of you. Yeah.
Would you say a little bit about your discernment to try to recognize, those 3 periods you just mentioned, and maybe some discernment you've had about hey, is this coming out of me, or am I pulling it to me?
Yeah. I think it's, look at the fruit of it. What are people getting from you? You have a spouse or children, they tend to be honest. Unless you train it out of them. That's like, what is the fruit of this? What are you getting from me? Because you can do this very same thing, serving the poor or working in a soup kitchen, but when someone else doesn't show up or someone doesn't say thank you or appreciate you, you get all pissed off. Who's that about? That's about me. Or say, you're just coming down here a do-gooder, you think you're better than us? What do you mean? I come out here every Friday night, I put my own money. That's all about you. And so that's got some work to do, right? What is this about? And I think as we move through this more and more, we're less positioned to run things, but our presence is still needed more than ever. Like, people ask me to do stuff now, but they mostly just want to hang out with me. That's a good sign. They're not looking for more information. And sometimes, at first I was a little offended by that. I got so much to tell you and teach you. That's not what we need. So, yeah, we don't have a lot of good role models, and I think that's what the crisis in our country is, and the work of developing elders. It's not about you, you're not in control, you're gonna die, and these become good news instead of, initiating the young men into a disruption at the very height of their, perceived ego. So, well, thank you for the conversation.